How did you come to meet up with Roy and Bob and Charlie?
Whoa, okay. Charlie Chin?
Charlie Chin.
Okay, because there have been, as you said, there's been many Charlies.
At least 3.
Yeah. Charlie Chin, Charlie Pritchard, Charlie Harcourt. I got out of college and started looking for work. Didn't matter what kind of, whether it was performing work or not. And I would go downtown and look around. Every day I would start, I was sleeping on the couch of a friend who had graduated from college, and I could hear his wife and he arguing at night about, he's only supposed to stay awake and now it's been almost a month and blah, blah, blah. So, and every day I'd go down and walk around the corner to the subway, and I'd pass this building that had a sign, and it said Riverside Memorial Chapel, help wanted, inquire within. And here I am going day after day after day trying to get work. And I walked in one day and said, I'm looking for work. And they said, you're hired. And I started working embalming, learned how to embalm a human being. And that was not the major part of it. It was you had to do everything. Well, that was the major part. But you had to do, first they put you on removals or just attending and moving a coffin after a ceremony in one of the chapels, and then drive them to a graveyard, etc. And then later on they'd put you in the actual, what they used to call the kitchen, because it was run by a mortician named Frank Kitchen, and it was called Kitchen's Kitchen. And I learned how to embalm a body. And one day I was reading the newspaper to try and find some performing work, and it was a mime troupe looking for a guitarist narrator. And I happened to have been learning guitar while I was in college. And so I went and got this audition for this job for this mime troupe. And the mime troupe was just 2 people, a man named Lionel Sheppard, who had studied with Marcel Marceau in France, and a woman named Sykes, who was the me of the Mime and Me, which was the name of the troupe, just 2 people. I would do things like Lewis Carroll's The Jabberwock, or a couple original stories that were sort of poetic stories, and they would do their mime motions as I did the guitar narration. And I eventually married the me of the Mime and Me, and her name was Sykes, which is unusual. So I married her. We had a little girl who's now a grandmother. Her name is Rain Equen, and she is also a performer, and she sings and has a gorgeous voice. Well, when I was still with Sykes, before she decided to go back to college and get her degree and move to Vermont, I was still trucking around Greenwich Village. That's how I got down there in the first place, was because of the Mime and Me act. They both lived in Greenwich Village, which was the mecca for a lot of artists and writers and performers, etc., since the 1920s or maybe even longer. Before the Ginger Man, before Cat Mother, I was playing guitar and a guitar duo. We were doing folk songs like from the Kingston Trio did, and the Brothers Four did, like Whim Away and Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, Hang Down Your Head and Die or Cry, or whatever the verse is. And all this is going on. And the other act was a guy who sang, and he played all with his thumb, and his name was Richie Havens, who later went on to some sort of degree of fame. And we were playing this little storefront club that was on West 3rd Street, and it was called the Cyclops because it just had one glass window, like one eye, and it had a door into the club on one side and a door to the upstairs apartment on the other side, so it looked like one eye, the storefront window, you know. And we played in the window and had a duo doing folk songs, and we were right across the street from the Night Owl, and I could see they were putting up on the marquee a new band. It was a rock and roll band, by gosh, and it was called the Lovin' Spoonful. And I knew the guitar player John Sebastian, and again they were just like, and Joe Butler was the drummer, and Zali Yanofsky, I think, was the lead guitarist, and there was another member who was the bass player, but I can't recall his name. At any rate, they're putting up on the marquee of this place called the Night Owl, and there were a lot of performers that came out of there. The person that used to pay your money to when you went in was a woman named Cass Elliott, who later became Mama Cass of the what was the act's name?
Mamas and the Papas.
Mamas and the Papas, correct. And there was another little sweet little girl named Shelly Plimpton, who starred in or acted in a new play on Broadway called Hair, and she got a degree of fame out of that and some work. And so I noticed that the whole scene was shifting from folk to rock bands, you know, happening. And it was also the time of the Beatles, so everybody was running around. Have you seen the latest Beatles album? You know, and everybody was bringing up the White Album, and then there was the Sgt. Pepper's album, and everybody was just going crazy over the Beatles because they were truly a talented group. So anyway, I saw that rock and roll was here to stay, basically, to coin the phrase, or to repeat somebody else's coining. So I thought, okay, this folk stuff's gonna go, and I'm gonna start looking around for people who want to put a band together. And I bumped into John Boylan and his younger brother Boona. I don't know what his real name was, but I'm sure Boona isn't on his birth certificate. But he was Boona Boylan, and he played bass, and John played guitar. And they'd been singing together since they were little kids, just like the Everly Brothers, you know. And I heard this story that these two guys were looking for a drummer, and I went, here I am, yay. So I started playing with these guys, and we were playing Upper East Side clubs off of Park Avenue, and, you know, kind of ritzy clubs and stuff. And to make a long story even longer, the club caught fire one night because of the neglect of the cook. Didn't keep the hood over there was a kitchen there that had a serving window, and the serving window, one night we were there, and we were attracting a lot more customers than that club was used to, so it was kind of packed. And as we're tuning up on stage, and of course we were getting paid better, we'd been there a couple of months, and I had a brand new set of drums, and we had a new sound system, and everything was going great. And so anyway, I calmly said to everybody, the kitchen's on fire, don't panic, it'll be all right, just go calmly outside the door and turn to your right or your left, but get away from the windows. And I had to talk these people out of rushing and panic and stomping over other people and maybe even hurting themselves in it or dying. And everybody walked out safely, and by the time everybody got out and moved to this right, the whole place had filled with this gas, and it went kaboosh, and it blew the whole front windows out of the club. It was on York Avenue in the Upper East Side in Germantown, they called it, that area. And even people across the street were looking out their windows like this, were hit with little shards of glass. That's how forceful that blast was. But nobody was hurt, except for an older couple that lived on the floor, next floor, the second floor, suffocated from the smoke in their sleep. They died a peaceful death, I hope. And so the Gingerman broke up, obviously. All the equipment was burnt, and I went back in, and my cymbals were like, like that. and all the metal feet, legs, whatever you want to call it, they were all bent and warped, and the amps and the speakers were all burned out. All the heads of my drums were burned off. They were just charred rims, and that was like a $600 drum set, you know, just in an instant was gone, and all the other equipment too. I think we managed to get a guitar and something else, a bass out or something like that. I had a beautiful jacket that was hanging behind me on the wall, but on my drum that had leather sleeves and lamb's wool, woven lamb's wool main part of the jacket. And a bag of weed in the pocket as I lost, and not that mattered, is nobody was hurt, you know, except that poor old couple, and even then, they probably didn't get hurt, they probably just died in their sleep, hopefully. So, the ginger men were done with. So I went back, gravitated back to the village, and just wandered around. Now the Cafe Figaro, which was a landmark in Greenwich Village since the 20s, maybe even earlier than that, and I went back there and I got a job as a cook there, breakfast cook, because they were open all night and all day. And through being there and asking questions about other musicians that might be around and stuff, and I put out the word that I was looking for a musical job, preferably a drummer. Somebody needed a drummer, and somehow I bumped into Roy Michaels and Bob Smith, who had already met each other and were looking. Bob Smith was this genius on piano and especially the Hammond B3 organ, and he was also a really, really fine songwriter. He had a little, not a very forceful voice, but it fit his personality perfect. And Roy didn't sing a whole lot, but we all sang. I didn't sing very much at all, a lead song, but I did a lot of harmonies sometimes we did two-part harmonies, sometimes we'd overdub two-part harmonies and have a quartet behind us, whoever was singing, or, even 6 parts, I think on the song Favors, where it goes, we'll do you favors, she'll go down, is a trick done in the studio where you overlap 2 tracks, one fading out and the other one folding in. And in retrospect, I never exerted myself to sing a lead song, and I should have, but didn't, so unfortunately I don't have even one song on all 4 albums where I sing the lead part, except for my Blue Suede Shoes on our hit single, which was number 22 in the top 40 of the Billboard charts. Well, we came to make a record because we had somebody who decided that we were good enough to be able to do that and had the money to pay for it, basically. So we're done in the studio. It was built with the money that Jimi Hendrix generated and we generated, and the manager stole from us both. And he built, among other things, he built Electric Lady Studios, where we did our 3rd and 4th albums. And Jimmy subsequently performed there for a minute until he died. Bob had a little portable piano that he carried around with him, and he had the B3 stored somewhere. They didn't live together. I mean, Roy and Bob had Roy had his wife and Bob had his wife, and that couple had their little child who was about the same age as Ellen and Roy's baby. Shaughness was her name, was the name of Roy's daughter, and Jennifer was the name of Bob Smith's daughter. And Rain was the name of my daughter, but she wasn't there at the time. She was with her mother in Arkansas. Even since the Ginger Men, I had a loft apartment right on 7 Bleecker Street, which was right where Bleecker Street, it was on the east side, the lower east side, and there was Bleecker Street, and then there was the Bowery. And then, I mean, the Bleecker Street came right and ended right at the Bowery, which is, Bowery was north and south, and Bleecker Street was east and west, and my loft was on the second to last building on Bleecker Street. Or actually not last, but it was the first, or the 7th building, or it's the 3rd building, but the 7th address. I guess one building had 2 different postal numbers. I guess rumor just went around, people were all the musicians would hang out. The Cafe Figaro seemed to be a focal point for all the artistic people there, that they could just sit down and have a cup of coffee, or they could eat there and stuff. And even at one point I worked there as a cook, and right in the middle of cooking something, somebody would rush in the kitchen and say, "Hey, have you seen this? This is the new Beatles album." And they'd show me the Beatles album and put their hands right by the cutting board where I was cutting something, and I'd say, "Keep your fingers away from that, you're gonna lose them, you know." But let me see the album anyway, so I got to see all the new talent that was being recorded and coming out, like the new Beatles. Everybody was waiting for the next Beatles album, and there was a big faction that were all Rolling Stones fans, you know, and so there was a kind of a musical division there between who was a Beatles fan and paid attention to all the Beatles work, and same with the Stones, you know. So the village, all the talent in the village swayed back from folk to rock, and all these new bands were coming up, like the Lovin Spoonful, and they were bringing in all these LA bands too, like Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. I saw them live at, it was a theater that was in a hotel, I can't remember the name of it. The band got together and we had enough rehearsal space for the hardest thing was carrying the B3 up the stairs. Bob Smith had a Hammond B3, and it took every inch of my strength, and Dan Furpo, who was just back from Vietnam, and his brother on the ground floor was working with this new medium called a mixture of lights and colored water and colored oil light shows in essence. And Dan was just back from Vietnam, and he became our road manager, you know, and helped us. Basically, he was strong enough to hold one end of the B3, and I was strong enough to hold the other end. So we wound up, I became the roadie as well as the drummer, one of the roadies. And so there was enough space to set up the drums and the keyboards and Roy's bass amp. I mean, Roy didn't set up his full array of double speakers on either side of the stage like we did in performance. And of course Bob had the Hammond B3, and then perpendicular to that on the side, he just turned and he had this little portable piano keyboard. But he could have made the piano sound with the Hammond B3, made those sounds anyway, so he didn't even really need that. It was redundant, basically. But he used it anyway just so I could carry some more shit for him, or stuff for him. But, and Bob, I think, he barely picked up a set of drumsticks if we were moving stuff around. I mean, he'd leave it all up to all others of us. We had a hearse by then, and Charlie Chin, that's where Charlie Chin and I wrote Bad News, in the back of this hearse, while Roy and Bob sat up front, and we're driving up the New York Thruway to get to Boston. And the separation of the road tires going, da-dum-dum, 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 and Charlie and I going, bad news, bad news. And then Charlie comes up with the lyrics, and we essentially wrote contributing words to the song on and off. He'd sing some words and then I'd fill in a couple of words. He ultimately sang the song on the recording. I don't know why I didn't insist that I sing with him, but it just didn't happen, you know, and I didn't care really. I was more interested in making sure I got my playing right, you know. I did a lot of harmony work with it, a lot of tunes, but anyway, the rhythm of the wheels hitting the tar on going up the New York State Thruway inspired Bad News to come out of it. Bad news, bad news. One song where, and I can't remember, but at the end of it, it stops and it has this long, rusty, it's a rusty hinge on the cupboard in our kitchen on First Avenue. And you can hear it go, slam, and that's the end of the song. But anyway, that door hinge, the door closing and slamming was actually just a cupboard this big that was in our kitchen on First Avenue, or actually it was on 10th Street and First Avenue where they meet. It's where the photograph of us all crossing First Avenue carrying our equipment was. We were just coming out of this brownstone that was right there on 10th Street. There was, and way in the back is a Lower East Side, the park there, not Riverside Park, that's West Side, but East Side Park, which was the slummy side of Manhattan, the Lower East Side. I had never even been to California before, you know. I mean, I had dreams of going to where it's always sunny, you know. I mean, I grew up in New York, or New York City, and south side of Chicago, you know, and I was lucky enough to go away from the city for a while, and I went 2 years of college in Florida, where the air was actually air and not soot. In those days, I had in apartment buildings in New York all had incinerator rooms on every floor, and then they had an incinerator in the basement, and you go, when you wanted to throw your garbage out, you walked out of your apartment, say you're on the 10th floor, and you walked out of to the incinerator room, which is a little closet-sized place, and you open it up, and there's this little door that you pull down like this, and you just dumped your garbage in the chute and closed the door and went down and fell whatever, how many floors up you are, into the incinerator and burned, and then all this soot went into the air, and that's the air quality of Manhattan in the 50s and 60s, you know. They eventually cleaned up that one. They didn't have any more incinerator rooms anymore, and they got into paying more attention to waste management, you know, after that. So we decided we wanted to go to California, I guess, and since we had already met Michael Jeffrey, who had gotten us this nice apartment on First Avenue and 10th Street, and gave us the record company, he got us a label, and we got a hit single on our first release. It was number 22 in the top 40, called Good Old Rock and Roll, which was homage to all the 50s rockers. But we didn't, each did a verse from one of the 50 songs, like Jerry Lee Lewis is a song that Charlie did, a song of Jerry Lee Lewis's, I believe. Yeah, we got a big hit and never got another one after that, because it was by contract that we signed with Polydor that we get to choose each release, and especially the second one. We had a hit first one, and the second one is very important because it also is a hit. Then it opens up the whole array of future releases and hits, possibly, you know. And so, breaking contract, Polydor released our second single entitled "Can You Dance to It?" with a question mark. And it was intended to be kind of not be able to dance too easily to it, you know. It just plodded along and it wasn't perky at all. Nobody wanted to dance to it. Nobody wanted to listen to it. I mean, none of us did, you know. And Polydor broke contract. They didn't ask us, what do you want to do next? And we were to listen to what we had already recorded or what we had to record and release it, And they broke contract and released that stupid song where there's a whole other bunch of songs that we had already recorded that could have easily been a second hit, maybe even number one on the charts, who knows. So after that, we couldn't, even after a while, we did 4 albums for Polydor, and they didn't play any more stuff on the air because there's a term for that. It's called a one-hit wonder, and we became known as a band that was a one-hit wonder. And it was only not because we didn't have the material; it's because they broke the contract. Polydor did, and released the song without asking us first, or even consulting about which one should we do. They just went ahead and released it. That was that. Each of us got X amount of money, which I don't recall the exact, maybe $1,000 or something to get used vehicles. And we just wandered around used car lots until we each found a vehicle that was suitable for our needs. And I packed my drums in the back. I got a Dodge van, Slant 6, 63 Dodge van, I think. And packed my drums and clothes and my girlfriend. And I built a bed in there that folded up and down against the wall and then down at night like that. And I hooked it with some rope, clothesline, so they'd level, and I had a roll-up piece of 4-inch memory foam or regular foam or whatever, and slept in that and took off, headed west. And Roy got a Volkswagen bus. I think Bob did too, I'm not sure. And who else came with us? Headed west at different intervals and stuff, but we knew where we were headed. We're headed from Muir Beach. I took a side trip to somewhere out, wherever it is, the Grand Canyon. I saw Grand Canyon 90 miles, and so I just turned off, and I'd never been to the Grand Canyon before. So I just said, I want to see the Grand Canyon, and it's only going to take me a day, so, behind everybody else, or maybe, actually it turns out I got there before one of the others was still schmoozing around looking at some other thing like Mount Rushmore or something, I don't know. But we all met there finally at Muir Beach. So that's where we had a common place to go, and so we just aimed for there and found somebody that lived there in a house, this couple, and so we'd venture out each day and look for a place for us to settle a town or whatnot, and we used those people's house as a sort of a home base that we could call in each day and say, I looked at each day we'd go north, south, and east, but not west, of course. and one day we all came back except for Roy, and the people in the house said, hey, Roy called from up north somewhere. He said, and the message was, travel on Highway 1 north until you hit a town called Elk. And so we did. And it was like going from hell to heaven, When we left New York 2 weeks earlier, it was mounds of dog pee ridden snow that had been plowed to the edges by snow plows, and then dogs peeing in it, and cigarette butts, and old snot rags, and what, nobody wanted to even go near it, And we left, and a week later we're in paradise, There's we drove up, and as we got farther north along Highway 1, even before we got to Elk, we're down by Point Arena in that area, and all of a sudden there's cattle grazing right by the side of the road with old fences built in the 1800s, and they're all sun-bleached wood fences and old-fashioned telephone poles, and we went, wow, this is just gorgeous, and flowers. This is November, and they're winter flowers growing on the hillsides, you know. Like I said, cattle grazing right there, and seagulls overhead, and beautiful splashing waves, and offshore rocks formations, and just like some of the pictures on the wall here at the gallery. We stopped at the Elk store, which is like just a one cash register country store run by Walter Matson Sr., and right next door was the Elk Garage run by his brother, Mel Matson, you know, and I mean, you could see that it was like people, they're all, and they were old guys about my age now, and they were like the fifth generation of the Matsons or something that had lived there that long. They've been, I mean, the town, those guys had relatives that formed that town, that started that town, you know, and it still, it was under 100 people there. The population 65 or 95, I forget exactly what it said, except it said Elk, California population, or pop period, 65, I think, or 95, I can't remember. But that was probably right off the highway, Highway 1, because back up in the hills, there were people living back up in there that were actually considered elk persons. Well, we hit in November, I think. It took about a week, 2 weeks to get across country, but because we stopped and started and, you know, schmoozed a little bit here and there. But it was winter time when we left New York because of the mounds of dog pea snow. And so it was, I think, in November. I think my birthday came in right there too. And the first boogie that we had was in Albion. There's a house going up as you go up Albion from the Albion store. Just half a mile on your left, there's an old farmhouse. And we played in the attic. And that place had heard just about this new band in town called Camelot, and it was a changeover from the 1969 to 1970. It was New Year's Eve. Yeah, it went over from the 60s to the 70s right there that night, and we had a boogie it was our first boogie in the area. You could feel the whole house going like this because we were playing up on the second floor in the attic. And there was a bowl there. People were putting all kinds of psychedelics in, acid and you know, whatever, mushrooms and stuff, and just stirring this vat of witch's brew, you know. And I remember meeting this guy, and we were on a break, and I was standing outside in the door getting some air in the door frame, and this guy's here. He's got this tie and a vest and a very straight-looking haircut, you know, and smoking a pipe even. I mean, I'm trying to create the stereotype, but he was close to the stereotype straight person, you know. And I mean, the thought of him smoking a joint would be just outlandish, you know. I mean, that's the impression he gave anyway, you know. And so I spoke to him for a little bit, but he had been sampling this punch all night long, you know, which was, I mean, they were throwing in Orange Sunshine and Owsley Acid and cubes from Timothy Leary and stirring this witch's brew. And it was just full of all kinds of psychedelics. And he was looking up at I remember standing talking to him, he's looking up at the stars and he goes, "Wow, it's really true what they say. We're all one," you know. And that concept, he was really feeling it. I mean, he realized how, when he touched the table, there was nothing that, everything, like what's between the table and my hand. And if you say a pocket of air, you go, yeah, but what's between the pocket of air on the hand side and the pocket of air on the desk side? You know, I got into this discussion with my wife in Riverside Park in New York earlier, when we got some real cubes from Timothy Leary. And so this guy went from being super straight Madison Avenue, you know, stock market, whatever, you know, vest wearing, pipe smoking, straight as an arrow, to realizing that we're all connected somehow, you know. And it was a huge revelation for him. And I saw him years later, and his hair was down to here, and he was wearing blue jeans and cowboy boots or something, you know. And he was just, he was a whole different person, you know. Whereas he probably was really, I don't want to say uptight, but just a real unenlightened person, maybe is a better term. But he was probably enlightened about a lot of other things. But basically, he really realized what the expression "we are all one" meant. You know, he felt it.
June 1970. Steered here by hitchhikers that I picked up on Highway 1 down by Bodega Bay, and it was getting dark. They asked me where I was heading, and I said, well, I was going to go camping on the Russian River someplace, I'm not sure where. And I tried it a few weeks ago, and vigilantes showed up and waved clubs at me and ran me out. You know, we don't need your kind around here, they said. So she said, well, we have a great place to camp up in Mendocino. It's just a little further up the road. And it's actually at least 2 hours, but she was right. We got there after dark, and I had this Volkswagen camper, and so they went to their camp, and I crawled in back and went to sleep. And in the morning, when I got up, and I went into Mendocino, and what do I find but this very one-of-a-kind truck, Commerce battery truck that belonged to Charlie Pritchard, who was a Texas guitar player from San Antonio and later Austin, who was in a band called the Conqueroo. And it turned out the Conqueroo came west about the same time I did, in '68 or so. And so I knew it was Charlie Pritchard's truck, so I started writing him a note. He was parked right in front of Dick's Place bar in Mendocino. And he walked up while I was writing the note and said, hey, Nick, how you doing? Come on in, we're about to have lunch. And at that time, Cat Mother had rented this building that they called the Playhouse, the Mendocino Playhouse. And it had, you know, it was an old building, and it had 2 levels of floors upstairs. It had been converted to a little theater on the ground floor, so it had a stage that was raised slightly from the main floor.
Right.
It had a mezzanine that looked down
All around.
Charlie, and so he invited me to lunch, and I walked in the front door and into a second door, and here was this large room with a table that must have had seemed like 24 people sitting on it, and Charlie's girlfriend, Lynn, was this tall, blonde Texas woman, sort of heavy set, and she was the cook. Everybody was there at the table, and I joined them and had lunch and learned about Cat Mother a bit, and I thought, well, this is cool. And at the time, I was still living in Berkeley and had split up with my ex-wife and was renting an apartment on my own. But I was kind of like tired of the scene and ready to move on. I just didn't know where. So then I was trying to figure, well, how would I make a living? I don't know. And, at the time, the beaches were covered with huge amounts of driftwood that had come down the rivers. Just, I mean, you couldn't see any sand. It was all logs. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'll get a chainsaw. I can cut slabs and stuff and sell slabs and something. I'll figure a way. So, but I kept coming back and was friends and had my in with Cat Mother, and I sort of became a roadie and friend.
And the first picture you took was us standing by this Commerce battery truck, wasn't it? Wasn't that your first professional?
That was my first professional shot. First shot I ever sold.
Wow.
So
You made a postcard out of it.
I did, in fact. Here it is. Here.
We have postcards. Fantastic.
See?
Yeah, who's that guy on the right, the very end? What's he doing
I
there?
can't see it.
No, he's doing something with a bag.
Yeah. Looks
I
like
don't-
he's rolling something.
Probably. Anyway, the band as it existed then was Bob Roy, Charlie Pritchard, Michael Equen, and Steve Davidson. Yeah, so that was the shot.
Oh yeah, that's
Here, take one.
So had you heard Cat Mother before you came, Nick? Did you know
Oh,
anything
no.
about them?
No,
You hadn't heard their song on the radio?
right, nothing. So, but I had this Volkswagen camper I was living in, and I was mostly sharing space with John Chamberlain, who was great graphic artist. Did the album covers from 2, 3, and 4 album, and hundreds of posters and signs, and wonderful guy, a musician too. He was a genius. He never used a computer in his life for anything, least of all his art. He did everything with inks and brushes and pens, and,
Yeah.
you know, the traditional way.
I mean, he carved that piece of wood.
Yeah.
You know, and that's Rick Lane's cabin behind
Yeah,
there.
yeah, as I recall, yeah.
And he shot, the album cover is shot through this piece of carved wood that's just incredibly carved and lettered. And then it's shot through it, you can see the cabin behind there. And then when you open it up, it's all of us standing on the porch and sitting on the porch. I'm sitting up on the roof with a guitar in my hand.
Yeah.
And wives and kids and everything running. And John's a little beatnik guy, you know, on a picket stake.
He's a little
stuck in the
mascot
ground.
guy. And he had a sharp nose then.
Yeah. Oh, he
He had a
changed
really
from a
sharp
rounded nose
nose.
to a short
He
nose.
changed the style, it evolved over time.
Oh, I didn't realize
That's how I
that.
can tell the earliest work from the later ones. John was from Cleveland originally,
Yeah.
and he had gotten to New York and was working for Hallmark, I think. Greeting cards.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I didn't.
he was doing commercial art anyway in it.
And he just wanted he wasn't happy with the whole business scene.
Well, unfortunately, we can't ask John if he
Right.
ran into Bob Crumb at the time, because John's gone. But
Charlie being the prototype for Fat Freddy and the Furry
oh,
Freak
absolutely, yeah. Well, when Charlie was a rock and roll guitar player, and the band he was in was called the Conqueroo
in Austin, right?
in Austin, yeah. And originally the front guy was a guy named Powell St. John, and as people that are into esoteric stuff may know, there's something called St. John the Conqueror root, which was like a folk kind of a spell, charm, voodoo kind of thing. And so originally it was St. John the Conqueror, and eventually St. John dropped out and it just became the Conqueror. So it was Charlie's band, he was the lead guitar player, hot stuff. They've got one record actually, but they decided to go seek stuff. There was a lot of movement between Austin and San Francisco in the late, middle 60s, 66, 7, 8, 9, and thereabouts. And anyway, Charlie ended up coming to the West Coast about the same time I did, and then the Conqueror broke up. Charlie got hooked up with Cat Mother by Tom Quinn or Houston, White or both.
I think it was Tom Quinn.
Yeah, I think he took credit for that.
We were booked into the this club in called the Whiskey A Go Go on Sunset Strip, and this is after we had stopped touring with Jimmy, but we were still getting some reasonably big time gigs, and we were staying in a hotel down only about 3 or 4 blocks away from the Whiskey A Go Go, and everybody else is already up there doing a sound check and stuff. But being a drummer, I didn't need to do a sound check, So I said, I'll be along in a minute. I'm watching this thing, and what I was watching is the moon landing, and I'm waiting for them to come out of the. It was at the point where they were just landing the ship, and then there's one small step for man, one giant step for mankind, and I had to, what's more important, that or doing a sound check that I don't even have to be there for, So I stayed behind, and Roy and Bob got all over my case because I stayed behind, for 20 extra minutes. And I couldn't believe that that was so petty of them, you know. But that's one of the big problems I had with being in Cat Mother was that it was a force. It was me and it was Bob and Roy, like that. I mean, they were like, because they had kids the same age, their wives were currently there, and I was already separated but not divorced from my first wife, and Rain had already been born, and I was in a different phase of my personal life, you know, and when it came to decision making and all kinds of different things, it was always Roy and Bob and me. I had to battle the owner, or the guy that ran Polydor Records. We were the first performers to be on Polydor after they moved from Europe to America. And then there was Polydor America, and we were the first performers on. This is the information I got. Whether it's factual or not, I don't know. But that's the story I was told, that we were the first performers to go on the Polydor label in the United States. And I wanted to have a fold-out album, like everybody else was having. You know, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young was coming out with a fold-out album. Dan was coming out with a fold-out album. All these people were coming out with fold-out albums. And if anybody that has any of our albums out there in video land, note that our first album is one single old-fashioned, you know, 40s and 50s album, 33 jacket, you know, 33 RPMs. And so I didn't get my way having a fold-out album. And then when I think it was right after that, Crosby, Stills and Nash & Young or somebody else that was coming up, but they weren't yet really reached their peak. And I walked in with one of their albums and I stuck it down, flew it down in the desk of the guy at Polydor, who was the president of Polydor America, and said, "Look, see, this could have been you. You could have been reading reviews about how, and you'd have been the first of the fold-out albums." John Chamberlain had the most amazing ability to take a simple pen drawing. Look at this little one up in the left-hand corner, especially the one of
Show it to the camera.
of Smith and Roy. Look, well,
Show it to the camera.
well, this
Point
upper
to
one
it.
right here. Can you get a good shot of that? If you look at, you got it?
Okay, my turn.
Now, look at the one of Roy.
Oh, yeah.
He could take just a simple pen and ink drawing and make it.
Yeah, really.
He's so recognizable just in that few strokes.
Yeah,
You can
that's
tell
right.
that it's not just a bearded, long-haired person, but you know exactly who that is if you know the person or knew the person.
Right.
And same with everyone else.
And you're the big tall guy with the big full beard and long hair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Roy and Charlie and Steve. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just a few strokes.
Well, he was a genius.
Look at this. That's me.
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
I mean, there's no mistaking whether that's Roy or
Right.
anybody. You know, in just a few pen strokes, who it is.
Yeah.
But this, look at that one.
Yeah.
It looks like a photograph.
Yeah, it does. It really captured his expression and
Yeah.
his look. Let me show this. See, here is Charlie Pritchard drawn by John Chamberlain. And there you can see the striking resemblance to Fat Freddy of the Freak Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Same guy, a few years apart.
Yeah. And this one of Roy sitting with the guitar or the bass across his lap, you know, even there's no mistaking exactly who it is, you know. And this one of me up here. And that one of Bob. It's like photographic. Like you'd swear that they took a photograph first and then made a pen and ink drawing from the photograph or something. It came out of the brain cells. He was just a genius.
Now look, in this one, the little beatnik has a round nose end.
Oh yeah.
But there's that first poster he did of Cat Mother, and it shows on a big flatbed truck coming along toward the point of view, and in the background down the road you can see New York skyline. And the little beatnik is in there, and he has a sharp point. You know, the nose goes instead of being rounded, it goes to a point.
Like this one. This was John Chamberlain's personal logo on
That was his avatar, or his little mascot, he called it.
Yeah.
The
Get a
little
close-up
beatnik.
of it if you
Called him
want.
the little beatnik.
They call him the little beatnik, yeah. Even on the Albion Dua album, he made a stand-up cutout of him, and he nailed it, or hammered it into the ground as a point. It's mounted on a pointed piece of 1 by something, and he hammered it into the ground so it looks like he's standing there, this little beatnik guy. That's what he called him, the little beatnik. He's there standing, here's the cutout. He nailed it into the ground, or hammered it into the ground, and he nailed that or attached it to the 1 by 3 piece of wood. All his artwork, at least the album covers, all except for the first one where we hadn't met him yet, that little character's there.
You were the first one to give your notice.
Well, even though I loved the whole experience, of being a founding member of Cat Mother and being in Cat Mother, it seemed like Roy and Bob were a force that were stuck together. And then there was it was like I didn't have a second half. Like Roy was one half of a force and Bob was the other half of a force. And we were always, it seemed, disagreeing. I was disagreeing with the force of both of them. They always stuck there. Now they're the place that they were in their lives, they both had children approximately the same age. They were married and together with their women. I had already gone through that period. I was older than all of them by a year or several years. And so aside from that, we disagreed a lot. Like when Dick Clark, I'll use this as an example, we got called by Dick Clark Productions, and then Dick Clark himself got on the phone, and he said, "Is this?" We're in the office. I think Michael Jeffrey got an office had when we met him, an office on Park Avenue, and with a cot that was under the stairwell to the building, and his office happened to be underneath part of the stairway, and under that stairwell was a cot where Jimmy slept. Okay, and here's this incredible worldwide talent sleeping in a cot under a stairwell, So that's how he got to he went to Woodstock to find a place to live for Jimmy, to have a house to retire to when he wasn't on stage. And we happened to be up there doing the sound outs at the same time. They kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until people were coming from everywhere, from the moon to get there, And so while we were gone, we put out a little flyer called the All Night News, which we left in record stores and clubs and stuff. And it was just, I did the masthead and I did a little cartoon called Crabs, which showed like a desert-like scene with little squiggly things at the base of what looked like hairs growing out of it, or actually made to look like cactus growing out of a sand dune, but it was a crab, and it had little voice bubbles saying things like, boy, this is going to make him itch, or something like that, or, I just made up little things. And we were a corporation. We had to incorporate. Michael Jeffries came to us when we were in Elk. He came all the way to Elk, which must have been a real chore for the guy, I say that sarcastically.
He probably flew right into Little River Airport.
I would imagine that's probably what he did, using our money and Jimmy's money to do it,
exactly.
to pay for it. And he came out to Elk and he said, you guys are going to need to incorporate. So this must have been early in this, just when we got to California, so it must have been 69 still, or maybe early 70. Because we incorporated and the corporation was said 69 to 73, it dissolved in 73, so we were only incorporated for 4 years. One album a year. So
contract. Well, he had a 5-year contract you couldn't get out of with Michael Jeffrey, right?
I think that's true, yeah. I don't remember specifically, but I know that we signed something with him.
I think it was before the second album was done?
Yeah,
That must have caused quite a stir with Michael Jeffries, right? Because you guys went on your own.
yeah, well, they didn't want us to leave New York.
Yeah.
And neither did the record company, nor did Michael Jeffries want us to leave New York. We said, why not? You go to London. You know, we can't even go to California. Come on, give us a break, you know. So we just took off.
I recall hearing the story that he had you guys, travel first class air, stay in classy motel, limos the whole trip, because that was the appearances, the optics of it, being a big successful rock and roll band on world tour with Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
But then in the meantime, he had you guys living in flats in the village
Oh, yeah.
on $100 a week allowance or something like that.
We played the Unicorn in Boston, co-billed with the Stone Ponies with this young, beautiful singer named Linda Ronstadt. And they were staying in a hotel directly across from the Unicorn Club, which is a big modern hotel. And we were sleeping on the floor of some friend of Roy's, and who let us sleep on the floor and the couch and stuff in the living room, And so that was the difference between Linda Ronstadt's manager, which was, we went with Jeffries because we knew that he had, first of all, he had the Animals, and they already had a hit record, The House of the Rising Sun, and we knew that he was the manager for Jimi Hendrix, who was the hottest guitar player going. So we said, hey, this is the guy we want to go with, And I can't say that I was hesitant to do it, but in most of the decisions that we made, it was always Roy and Bob together like that, and me over here with an opposite stance, or opinion or whatever. And it was always Roy and Bob together clashing with me. That's when we approached Michael Jeffrey about housing while we were in New York, because we were scattered around in different apartments that Roy and Bob had already had, and they're giving up, and so in New York, he rented for us a brownstone on First Avenue and 10th Street, right, just one block up from Avenue A, which is the Lower East Side. And it was rainbow painted, the whole face of it. You can see it on a photograph of us walking across the street. And if you look really carefully on the right-hand side, looking down 10th Avenue and what did I say that was? 10th Street and that First Avenue. Yeah, looking down 10th Street, you can see the park way back down on Avenue A. And right up close on the right-hand side, you can see the profile of this rainbow-colored brownstone, and that's where we had us housed. Larry Packer had the basement. I had a bedroom off the kitchen, which is on the first floor, and Bob and Alice and Jennifer, this was before Noah was born, had the next floor, and then Bob,
Roy?
and Roy and Alice.
Roy and Ellen.
Roy and Ellen, yeah. Bob and Alice, Roy and Ellen. And I had a room right off the kitchen, so the kids are always waking me up in the morning and banging on the door and running around and yelling and screaming and crying and laughing. And
How long were you guys in that location?
Oh,
A year or so?
I was gonna say about a year.
About a year.
Yeah.
And did he also hold on to all the proceeds from your touring and give you an allowance to live on?
We had on paper on our itinerary, it says, New Orleans Pop Festival, $20,000. Atlanta Pop Festival, $20,000, and had the dates and stuff. And it said, so-and-so, $20,000. A couple of them were $15,000. And then when we got paid each week, we got $100 per diem for get us through burgers at the airport and stuff like that.
Actually, per week, right?
No, a month.
Per day? Per diem means per day.
Yeah, that's true.
You got $100 a week, right?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
that's right, per diem does mean, yeah, we were getting $100 a week.
Well-
So it wasn't a per diem, it was a per,
Well, it was an allowance,
there you go, that's
an
a good term.
expense allowance.
Right, and here we are surmising that he's putting the rest of the thousands away for us, the other 19,000, each couple of days that we're playing, And Jimmy's was the same, only it said 80,000, that's playing the Atlanta, because we were opening for him, so it said the same thing, Atlanta Pop Festival, $80,000, New Orleans Pop Festival, $80,000, Woodstock, $80,000. And we were supposed to be in Woodstock, I probably told you guys this, but,
You were in London, Ontario.
yeah, we were doing a radio interview of all things the night before. And we got up and we were headed out down the New York State Thruway for only 90 miles away from Bethel. And they've closed down, they won't let anybody on the Thruway. So, could we see into the future? Thank you. We had 3 days and only 90 miles to get there. Now, there are other things besides the New York Thruway that we could have woven our way down to Bethel and gotten there within that 90 days period, But, who knew, So we called Michael Jeffrey and said, this is the problem we're having, what should we do? He says, you played the New Orleans Festival, you did the Atlanta Festival. What's another outdoor festival,
Yeah.
And, of course, without being able to think ahead, we didn't know. So what was another? It was just another, inconvenience to our doing outdoor festivals was closing down the Thruway. So we missed it, and because we missed it, weren't in the movie. Even Michael Lang, who produced the Woodstock Festival, in a documentary that I saw on TV about Woodstock, gave us credit without naming our name, but he said a local band that was playing playing nearby or something gave me the inspiration to raise the money.
But he went to some of the sound outs, at least one.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, why didn't he say our name?
Yeah, no, I saw that in an interview with him.
Did he say, he didn't say our name though, right?
No.
I wish he had.
He may not have known that you guys were producing.
It could be. He said there was a band, he didn't even say Cat Mother, he said, what gave me the inspiration to do this was this other band that was doing outdoor festivals in the town of Woodstock, which it was. We were just within the borderline.
Nearby, yeah, Socrates.
Right, Socrates was just past where we were.
Mm-hmm.
So, A Brief History of Cat Mother by Ellen Callis. Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys was a band born during the late spring of 1967 in New York's Greenwich Village, the brainchild of musical collaborators Roy Michaels and Bob Smith, leaving out Michael Equen, combining amplified violin, mandolin, banjo, and a basic rock quartet with complex melodies and intelligent lyrics. Cat Mother was an instant New York City success. The band's socio-political views often found them organizing for activist causes. In New York City, they held benefits for the War Resisters League, WBAI, and a variety of other community groups. While living upstate in the summer of 1968, they held a bi-weekly outdoor Woodstock Festival of Sound and Light that became the inspiration for the famous 1969 festival. After their top 10 hit Good Old Rock and Roll, a stint as the Electric Circus House Band, and extensive national touring with Jimi Hendrix, who produced the first of their 4 albums, Cat Mother migrated west to California. In late 1969, Cat Mother, with families in tow, landed quite accidentally in Mendocino. On December 31st, that laid-back community danced wildly into 1970 to the electric sounds of its newest residents.
It's true.
For the next decade, keyboardist Smith, bassist Michael's drummer Michael Equen, new percussionist Steve Davidson, and a variety of guitarists would be the musical epicenter of the Mendocino Coast community. They held regular dances, outdoor boogies, in quotes, voter registration drives, and countless benefits. Continuing touring and recording, Catmother eventually morphed into the Gonzo Bandits, and then Horse Bedorties and Smith. For many Mendonesians, they remain the soundtrack of our memories. So it's just a little,
Yeah, did you write that?
No, Ellen wrote this,
Oh. Yeah,
at my request.
wonderful.
So-
I thought that was very
Just
sweet.
a little something. See, this book is dedicated to Bob Smith because he had not so long ago died.
Yeah.
Well, actually a while, well back before this, but that's the first picture in the book. This is in his apartment in San Francisco, about 75 or so, you might say. 77.
It was after we broke up, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
I was actually coming home from an anti-whaling voyage with Greenpeace and stopped in to see Bob. And the light was nice, and I just said, let me take a picture.